Well, hello everyone. Thank you for being with us today, and happy Mother's Day to all you mothers in the world. We appreciate you, and we're glad you're here today. And those of you that will be coming later on, also on YouTube. So we hope you're enjoying our study on what I call the Acts of Ekklesia. Hi, Debbie. Happy Mother's Day. So we're in chapter 9 now. It's going to be a little while to get through chapter 9. I was telling the people here, it's probably one of the longest chapters that I've written on. I have 35 pages of notes, so I'm assuming there'll be 2 or 3 sessions on this, but we're going to start reading from Acts 9, 1 through 2. And as I always say, if you're new here with us, I don't read from the King James Version. I read more of a spiritual understanding of the Bible. I translate the scripture. So this is not going to line up with your Bible. So good morning, Kay. Happy Mother's Day. Love you. So verse 1 through 2. We're still here where Saul, we're at the end of where they stoned Stephen. And so Saul was there. And it says, and Saul, still breathing out the energy of threats and inner violence from his old awareness against the awakened fellowship of Jesus' followers, turned again to the high priest of religious authority. And he requested written authority to the synagogue at Damascus, so that if he discovered any whose way of life flowed from the way, which is what they didn't call them Christians, they called it the way, of inner union, whether men or women, he might bind them in restrictive awareness and then bring them back under the jurisdiction of Jerusalem below, the city of what we would call outer religious order. So this is kind of an allegory here. Saul pictures a sacred self whose awareness is still ruled by separation or zeal for doctrine. And a lot of people are there. They still see themselves as separate from Elohim, or if you want to say God, and they have a real zeal for their doctrine, and they have a fear for losing control. Not necessarily the religious leaders only, but people. I've talked about this a lot, about how my aunt once told me, if it's good enough for grandma, it's good enough for me, and I'm not interested in changing. I don't want to lose control of what I believe. Yeah. But his very breath is charged with hostility. Not because he's bad, but because of this inherited consequences thinking and this religious system that still shape his awareness. I've dealt with people a lot that way in my life. They get mad at me, because I'm sharing something that may be a greater truth. And sometimes I think that it's just people don't want to change. It's not so much that they don't necessarily believe that you know what you're talking about, but I think they just don't want to change. One of the worst ones is I'm too old.
It's very scary.
It's scary.
What you believe
Yeah, it is.
True.
It is.
That's very scary.
It's scary. And then a lot of older people, they think, well, I've been in this all my life like my aunt was. And, I don't want to go through what I had to go through to change. But I do believe what the scripture says, that Father will give us a quick understanding. And I was told that myself when I worried about my church, new people coming and not being able to catch up with us. And I heard, I will give them a quick understanding. So the high priests here represent the peak of external authority, the final court of appeal, if you would, for those who have not yet learned to turn within to breath. So Damascus symbolizes the inner place of silence, or silent weeping. It symbolizes inner conflict. It symbolizes old identity that is about to unravel. And so the letters he seeks here are written arrangements of belief, the authorization of religion to persecute inner awakening. And to bind those in the way is to drag awakening faculties back under the domination, if you would, of rigid doctrine. Yet, unknown to Saul, his old awareness, his very journey will become his path and his encounter that's going to bring him to tremendous light. And I would say, I wouldn't think everyone, but most people prior to their awakening, there is that resistance that comes. And, it's like I said a few weeks ago, Peter, I think it was Peter was talking, Stephen was talking and explaining the Bible and explaining the history. And the high priest finally said, is this so? Is this so? because they're just not sure. Like Donna said, it's kind of scary, to leave everything that you ever thought you believed in. Saul represents this stage of awareness in which a sacred self is fully convinced it is serving Elohim, yet it's resisting Elohim. It's resisting breath. And I believe today sometimes a lot of us have really have resisted, if you want to say God, because we pray for something that we think we want, and it's not really what we really need. But we're always finding it. We want what we want, right? And so we are resisting the prayer that we're praying. I've heard people pray that Father would wake them up, and well, they didn't know what it meant, wake up. And so he's breathing out threats because his little ego of illusion is still aligned with fear and control and separation. And its inhaling is from this atmosphere of religious performance, and so it excels this. It projects its judgments against those who live from awakened union. And the disciples he opposes are not just people outside of him, but metaphysically they are that inner faculty that I talk about. There's a divine faculty that each disciple represents: faith, strength, judgment, love, power, imagination, understanding, will, order, and zeal, elimination, and then life conservers. Those are all those divine faculties that's literally in every one of us. And each disciple pictured one of them individually. So these ideas are already beginning to flow through this pattern that Jesus was aware of. They symbolize the emerging aspect of this consciousness of turning inward, turning into the realize that I exist. In the Bible where Elohim told Moses, he asked for his name, and of course they said his, but it says, instead of I am that I am, it actually says I exist that I exist. Every place where you see the word am, it's actually exist. So this old awareness always feels threatened when a new revelation rises, because it senses its own end, if you would. I've had many times in my studies where I begin to see more and more and more, and I begin to sense the old way of saying things, the old way of doing things, the old way of writing things. The very change of God to Father was a big deal, because all my life I said God, I wrote God, I heard God. And of course the Bible says that Jesus said Father, which he did not. He was really saying source, if you would. But to change that way, and then now I say breath. And a lot of people resist that. They don't quite get what I'm talking about, but the word spirit actually comes from the word that means breath. And so it is the breath of life. It's not the spirit of life. If you want to say spirit, that's fine. So Saul's going to the high priest shows that when old awareness is challenged, it retreats to a higher authority. That's kind of like saying, well, my church doesn't say that. My pastors don't teach that. And then they'll kind of go to the higher authority and check things out. So the high priest depends on that. And it's the cry of the old awareness that says, tell me I'm right. In other words, it goes to maybe their pastor somewhere, and my friend on my job is saying this and that, and tell me I'm right. I need to know that I'm right. And that gives them permission to silence the new thing, the new understanding. And so Saul requests these letters indicates a desire for written authorization. Letters symbolize doctrines, they symbolize creeds, they symbolize official statements that permit one to act against inner awakening. And so, some people might say, well, I've been to Bible college, I have a doctor's degree, I have a master's degree. They're trying to make some kind of proof for them to resist this new understanding, this new teaching. And so old awareness wants that because it fears the freedom that comes when you listen directly to breath. If you almost get used to the bondage, if you would, of religion that holds you back. You've got to have some rules. I mean, if you don't have rules, and when we taught the finished work a long time ago, we used to tell us that we were giving people license to sin. Remember that? You don't have to give people license to do things wrong. They're going to do it anyways. But they thought that we were doing that because they feared losing control. And the truth is, we don't need to control people. Once you hear the truth, and once you live out of breath, you live out of your spirit, that's your restraint right there. When you know who you are. And
Listen.
huh?
If you listen
If you listen.
to what the voice is telling you.
Right. So his destination now is Damascus, a name that evokes silent weeping. It evokes city of blood enclosed, if you would. And Damascus is the inner region where the sacred self is torn between devotion to an old understanding and the growing pressure of the inner light. It's kind of like two different loves. It's a place where tears and confusion begin to form. And this crust of doctrine hides in a deeper ache, if you would. What if I've been wrong about Elohim? And a lot of people need to question and ask that. I always thought all my life I knew what God was, but I didn't know. I just knew God, but we didn't know who God was. We didn't really know what God was. There was some God out on a planet somewhere. But there needs to come a time when we begin to say, what if I'm wrong? It's what is it costing me? It's not going to cost me my life after death, but what is it costing me now? Well, it's costing me peace. It's costing me joy. If I believe there's a God out there that can be angry with me and a God that requires me to do something to be pleased with me, then I'm missing out on the whole thing. And so what if I'm wrong? And Saul's intent is that if he found any of this way, whether men or women, he wanted to bring them bound back. He really didn't question that. He just knew he was right. And so to bind them means to place chains of fear, chains of guilt, and a doctrinal pressure upon awakened awareness. Dragging them back to Jerusalem represents that thing, the city of religion. I was reading one of Kay's posts today, and somebody wanted her to teach on true religion. And she was talking about that religion, like I found out before, means to bind and hold back. But true religion binds you to truth. There's nothing wrong with that when we find out what true religion is. It binds you to truth. And I am bound to truth today. I cannot go back to that old way. And so this inner peace that he needs to find, this scene shows an intense inner conflict. The sacred self, through Saul, is actively trying to stop its own awakening, if you would. And it's a battle, and it's tough. It hurts you, if it would. So it's attempting to arrest the very idea that would free it. Yet the journey toward Damascus is ordained by breath, because it's precisely in that place of inner weeping and crisis that light begins to form and light begins to grow. I could rehearse my life and what I went through and all the different processes of growing. There was some inner weeping. There were some inner struggles before. There was separation from pastors that had taught me things that I believed for a long time. And all of a sudden I realized that's not it anymore. And so there is some of that a little bit. There's still that love for what brought you here. I can't say I love what I was taught, but I love the people. I love the ministers. I love the times that I was with them. But what I was taught was holding me back. And I've always been one that I'm not satisfied. I want more and more and more.
You loved the sense of belonging.
Yes, that sense of belonging, the familiarity that we talk about.
Exactly.
We become familiar with
That
things.
was our whole family. I mean, they were our whole family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this very movement towards control is what sets the stage for this encounter that Paul's later going to have, and we're going to see with the Logos life. Okay? So verse 3. Acts 9, 3 through 9. Hi, Sue, Carol. Glad you guys are here. And as Saul journeyed and approached Damascus, suddenly a light out from the invisible shone around him. And he fell to the earth and heard a voice within him saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you pursuing to restrain and suppress me? And he said, who are you, teacher? And the voice said, I am Jesus whom you are suppressing. It's hard for you to resist the inward prodding of awakened awareness. And tremble and astonished, he said, Teacher, what do you desire that I do? And the voice said to him, Rise and enter the city, and it will be spoken to you what you must release and what you must receive. And the men journeying with him stood speechless, hearing the vibration of the voice, but seeing no one. And Saul arose from the earth, and when his outer eyes were opened, he perceived nothing. But they led him by the hand and brought him to Damascus, and for 3 days he remained without sight and neither ate drink. Now what we're going to see is the breaking light of awakening. As Saul approaches Damascus, he's not merely nearing a geographic location. He's nearing the inner threshold of transformation. Damascus symbolizes the inner region of silent struggle, where inherited religious awareness meets the logos, if you would, that pull. So the light that suddenly shines is not a literal flash from the sky. It's illumination of I exist awareness from rising within the sacred self. I have many times in my office, I feel like a light shining. But what it is, it's revelation. This light does not come as a judgment, but as revelation. It's confronting Saul's old awareness with that radiant truth of oneness. The light shone around him as a complete encirclement, symbolizing the awakening begins to penetrate every direction, every belief, every hidden assumption. Old identity cannot escape that. And that's that time of transformation. And we've all been through that. I mean, it wasn't just one thing that needed to be corrected. I had a lot of beliefs that needed to be corrected. And so Saul, it says here, fell to the earth, which is not about a physical collapse, but it's the collapsing of old self-perception. Earth represents outer framework of identity. It represents the carnal awareness formed by religious systems. So the voice speaks his name twice, Saul, Saul, which is a pattern of a deep calling unto deep. Many places in the Bible we see where Elohim used a person's name twice. So that's a deep calling. This is the sacred self being addressed in this level of identity. And then the voice says, why are you persecuting breath? It reveals that every attempt to suppress awakening is actually an attempt to suppress the I exist within your own being. When you resist awakening, when you resist messengers coming to you with a clear message, then you're not resisting them so much as you're resisting that within inside of yourself. And every religious attempt to silence the way is the sacred self resisting its own freedom. And people are always praying for freedom, are they not? They're praying for help, but they're expecting the wrong thing. I have somebody that told me about how they were asking for something from Elohim, and they never have heard the answer. And my first thought is, well, maybe you were expecting a different answer. Maybe you were asking for what you wanted instead of what you needed to hear. And sometimes when we're praying for things where those aren't necessarily what we need to hear. So this is the question of identity. Saul's response is, who are you, teacher? It's a sincere but also an unawakened question. The voice answers, I exist as breath, if you would. They put Jesus in there, but I am breath whom you are suppressing. In other words, you're suppressing your own breath within inside of you. You're suppressing that voice within inside of you. The voice Saul hears represents union consciousness, the embodiment of I exist, the awareness of oneness with Elohim. Saul's been resisting that consciousness, not a person. And he always did that. And that's the reason he hated what Stephen was saying, because Stephen was teaching truth. So the voice said, it's hard for you to resist this inward prodding. That describes this painful tension that occurs when old awareness begins to struggle. And it's very hard. And so the friction Saul feels is the friction of transformation. It's the resistance of the ego to surrender to the rule of the Logos. And surrendering the old awareness, it's a hard thing, letting it go. And so trembling and astonished, Saul says, what do you desire that I do? Wise question. Very wise. This trembling is not fear, but it's a collapse of certainty. The astonishment of this is the sacred self realizing that it's been wrong about Elohim. It's been wrong about the law. It's been wrong about separation. The voice says, rise and enter into the city. Rise means elevate in your awareness. And then enter the city means moved inward into the consciousness. We are the city. The Bible teaches that we are the city of Elohim. And so where transformation will occur. So it said it will be told to you what you must release and what you must receive. So awakening always requires a letting go of old doctrine. And you can't keep a little bit of it because a little bit leavens the whole lump. Right?
Yeah.
And so to receive new light, you have to let go of the darkness. Nothing's enforced though. Everything is just revealed, and it's up to us to let it go. And there's some things that we hung on to for a while, some beliefs that we hung on to for a while, but eventually we realize if we're going to go all the way, then we have to let go of everything. And that's why I tell people all the time, it's very difficult to realize that almost everything you believed was wrong. Probably the only thing that we ever believed that was right is that Father loved us. But then religion put a but to that, right?
Right.
So the men journeying with him stood speechless. They heard the vibration, but they saw no one, and they didn't understand. And these companions represent outer thoughts, old structures, unawakened mental faculties. They can detect the voice vibration, but they're not tuned into it. Remember I talked about the violin key and the violin can detect the some kind of vibration, but if it's not in tune with the A key, it won't recognize it and it won't vibrate like it can vibrate. And so sometimes people come to church and they say, man, I really felt something today. I'm not sure what it was because they weren't tuned into it, but they were feeling something they'd never recognized before. And so Saul rises, but through his eyes, though his eyes are open, he still sees nothing. So the most important thing about this is not that he was physically blind, but his eyes were open, but he couldn't see. He couldn't see anything in truth. And so this blindness is symbolic of the old way of seeing has ended. This perception no longer works. He must now learn to see from an inner light. So they led him by the hand, meaning the old faculties, though blind, still escort the sacred self through moments of transformation. Saul must be carried into this experience that will dissolve him, if you would. Dissolve everything that ever believed and awaken him. So him being blind for 3 days is familiar symbolic pattern. This is the number of divine fullness. It's the number of completion. It's the number of transition. So these days represent the death of an old identity. See, we used to teach that we had to die to ourselves, or literally, I say die to our old ego. And that's when Paul said, I died, when I died, what he was speaking about is ego. It's me, myself, and I. And he said, the life I live now is in contact with my divine mind. So the old identity is the burial of inherited awareness, and it's the silencing that takes place before awakening. We had to come to that point where we realize that these things that we believe really wasn't helping us. And I've asked a lot of people before when they would tell me they believe something, I would say, how's that working for you? I got that from the shack. Did you ever see the shack?
Yes.
Have you? Yeah. When Matt came to what do they call her, mother? Yeah, and he told her he thought that God was a God of judgment and all kinds of stuff, and she said, how's that working for you? That people need to think about that. How is what you believe working for you? It's really not helping at all. So where he's at now, he's suspended between two identities, awaiting the voice of breath that reveals the new consciousness, but still having all that memory of the law that he struggled with. And you see later on, he's writing in the Gospels, in his writings, And he speaks and he said, why is it when I would do good, I would do bad? And then he would say, it's because there's sin in my members. Well, that member was a subconsciousness. I wrote a lady in Canada the other day. When you talk about your past a lot, your subconscious has no way of discerning time. So if you think about, Tammy, something that happened to you bad a year ago, and you dwell on that, then your subconscious produces that hurt all over in you as though it's happening today. That's why Paul later on said, putting these things behind us. But he asked Father, he said, help me, remove this from me, my dependency on the law. That's what it was. It was the law. And Father said, my breath is sufficient. My divine mind is sufficient. Go within. And that's what he did. And from that point on, Paul didn't struggle anymore at all. And so this is really helpful for us because Saul enters this 3 days as a defender of the law, but he emerges out as Paul, the revealer of oneness. Isn't that amazing? And we'll see later on where some of the disciples didn't trust him yet because they said, man, this is the guy that held the coat where they killed Stephen. This is the man that was dragging the people that's in the way and allowing them to kill him. You know, but that's why Paul could say, I have wronged no man. And a lot of people question that. But he said, I'm not that person anymore. Mm-hmm. That person's not alive anymore. Mm-hmm. I am Paul. And so to me, that's pretty cool. So this is the sacred death of the old self then. And that is sacred. It is a sacred thing as we allow the very breath of God inside of us, the Elohim, to begin to remove things from us. And it's not hard. It's not mean. It's not violent. It's just a quiet voice that's saying, this is the way. This is the truth. And what happens, it begins to ring true inside of you. And it's not hard to believe anymore. You know, my wife, you know, she struggled a lot for a while with some of the stuff that I've taught. But now I think you're in a place where it's easy to understand now, isn't it? And it's hard. It's not hard for you anymore. And I'm glad, because it was hard for me for a while too. So it's a sacred death. What I mean by sacred death, it's not like a death of a person. It's a death of everything that's hindering us. That's sacred. Okay. Verse 10. And there was in Damascus a certain disciple named Ananias, and to him the breath spoke in a vision, Ananias. And he replied, I exist, here I am. And breath said to him, rise and go to the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judah for one called Saul of Tarsus. For look, he is praying. And he has seen a vision, a man named Ananias coming in and placing his hand upon him, so that he might receive sight. That's verse 10 through 12. So this awakening, this is an awakening of a compassionate perception. Ananias means Yah has been gracious, or the compassion and kindness of the divine. And so Ananias represents this inner faculty of clear, compassionate perception, the part of awareness that sees beyond outer conditions and listens to the guidance of breath. That's where we all need to be at in our world. We need to see beyond the outer condition of a person and listen to breath and say, what do you want me to say? How do you want me to react? And first of all, it would be love, not judgment. So significantly, Ananias is already in Damascus, the inner place of conflict. And this shows that compassionate perception is always present in the very area where old awareness is, and it's breaking it open. And if you remember, every place Jesus went, he was there to wake them up, right? Mm-hmm. He was there to teach them the truth and reveal the truth of who Father was, but they needed healing. And so it said he had compassion on them. Yeah. And that's important. Sometimes you think you're going there to really set somebody straight, but you need to have compassion. And you need to listen to breath and let breath tell you what to say and when to say it. So there is something beginning to break open. Even before Saul collapses in the blindness, the faculty that will bring him healing is already waiting for him. The person that was there, Ananias, is already there waiting for him. And the master, the inner voice, calls Ananias, and he answers, "Here I am." This response echoes this ancient pattern of awakened awareness saying, yes, and it's a readiness to participate in divine movement. All through the Bible, where you read of the consecrated messengers, Isaiah, Jeremiah, every one of them ended up saying, yes, I will go. Yes, I will go. Here I am, send me. So the street represents the path of awareness. The straight symbolizes, the street called straight. Straight symbolizes alignment. It symbolizes the path where truth flows without distortion. And to rise means to elevate awareness out of reluctance and to obedience, or to attentive listening to that inner voice that's speaking to you. So Ananias is told to seek Saul in the house of Judas. Judas symbolizes betrayal, but here it takes on a more profound meaning. Judas represents the part of awareness that portrays its true identity to outer law, yet becomes a stage in which transformation can begin. And so we have to literally betray our identity to what we were told that we are. We are not sinners saved by grace. I am not going to be faithful to that law anymore. I'm not going to be faithful to outer identity that I have to do something to get God to be pleased with me. I'm betraying that. That's what I'm talking about here. So this sets the stage for transformation. Saul of Tarsus is described as having a conversation here, not begging, not apologizing, but turning inward. Conversing here means the inward turning toward breath, the deep posture of surrender. It's not praying anymore, but it's just having a conversation. I no longer pray in a sense that I ask for something or beg or plead for something. I just have conversations. And those conversations always begin with thankfulness. I am so thankful that I can hear the voice of breath. I'm so thankful that I've been led down this path. And I just live a life of thanksgiving. And when I do that, whatever needs to be spoken to me, it just comes. Whatever street I need to turn down, I know that's where I need to go. Whatever person I need to approach, I know. It's just there. And so this is a inward turning. It's a deep posture of surrender. I no longer see, is what he was saying, means literally show me. Show me what you want me to know. And we all need that, a personal. I can tell you what I think you need to know, but you need a personal show me what I need to know. Everybody needs that. And he's beginning to yearn for the light to explain what happened. So Saul's statement is a sacred self admitting, I no longer see the way I used to see. That's the beginning of spiritual humility. Saul has seen a vision. A man named Ananias, he saw this, coming to restore his sight. And this is beautiful here. Before Ananias physically arises, Saul's awakened awareness already recognized what he needs. He already knows it. And so this vision represents the moment when the sacred self knows its healing will come through compassionate perception, not by law, not by punishment, or not out of authority. You know, a lot of people, after what Paul did, I would be afraid I'm getting ready to get punished for everything that I did. But there was no punishment whatsoever.
Yeah.
There was nothing but love. The union of perception with identity, the impartation of spiritual sight, and the laying hands of understanding, it's not a ritual. It's just a natural thing that needs to take place in all of our lives. And sight here, again, it's not a physical function. It's an inner perception. We have all been blind, have we not? We have all walked blind.
Yes.
And we needed to be blinded by the light. Been blinded by the light You know, didn't we used to sing a song, I saw the light, I saw the light? Well, we didn't really. We still had those scales over our eyes, which I'll explain what they are. But the union perception, this impartation of spiritual light, is the laying on of understanding, not necessarily laying on of hands. In all of our life, in our church, we always had the laying on of hands. You know, they would impart things to us. Brother Garner used to lay hands on us to impart a spirit of wisdom and revelation and the knowledge that Jesus came to teach. We already had that. So what we needed to get to, and Father brought us to that place, is we got to the place where we got an impartation of spiritual sight, an impartation of understanding and wisdom and knowledge. So sight is not just physical, it's that inner perception. And this is why Ananias must come. Ananias is what? Compassion, compassionate perception. It's a gateway which the sacred self receives the new awakened vision. If you're looking for a consecrated messenger in your life, make sure they're compassionate. Make sure they're not going to come in and treat you like you don't know nothing. Make sure that they're going to listen to breath and give you what you need at this time, because everything is based on compassion. Ananias speaks out of compassion, the faculty that sees through the single eye of breath and brings healing of the old awareness. So that's the kind of healing that I want to bring people. If I want to save people, I want to save them from their false beliefs, not from an angry God, right? So that's what this is all about. Hey, Hector, glad you're here. Even though you're late. Verse 13 through 16. Then Ananias answered, Teacher, I have heard from many about this man. See, he's a little concerned himself, how much harm he has done to your consecrated ones in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call upon the character, authority, and essence and consciousness of Elohim. But the teacher said to him, Go your way, for he is a chosen vessel to bear my way, my nature, and a message before nations, kings, and the sons of Israel. For I will show him the many things he will release as he carries my character, or authority, essence, and consciousness into awakening. That is powerful. Paul is probably the only convert Ananias. Isn't that amazing? And look what Paul did. Look at the books he wrote. A lot of people read the King James Version and they don't like him and they don't think he had a great awareness or anything. I totally disagree. I think after that time of him asking Father to free him from all that religious teaching, I think he became one powerful teacher. And in this, I think of Billy Graham and the little man that was having a revival somewhere, a tent revival. 3 or 4 people were showing up. Nobody was coming hardly. He was so disappointed. Nobody came and got saved. And on the last night of the revival, a little boy walked in. And he preached the salvation sermon, and the little boy came down and gave his life to the Lord, and his name was Billy Graham. Look, isn't that a powerful story? That guy thought he was worthless. Well, you know what? We don't need to worry about numbers. We can go out in the world and touch one person that's going to turn around and touch millions of people with a message of love. Mm-hmm. And that's why I always remind myself of that. Because I'm sitting in front of 2 people right now. But I'm also in front of a camera that's touching thousands of people all over the world, and I have no clue what one of them is doing in their world. And that's what it's all about. So this Ananias story is always very touching to me. Again, Ananias means compassionate perception, but he hesitates for a minute. And this hesitation reflects this profound spiritual truth. Even awakened faculties can struggle to see the past, the repetition of one's old awareness. And that's why we must be cautious not to do that. Because sometimes we might overdo it and not recognize that this is a divine appointment. So he said, Teacher, I've heard how much harm he's done. This symbolizes how we often can carry a memory of past beliefs a memory of judgment or a memory of actions. Ananias thinks the story of Saul defines Saul, but it does not. And that's why I want to tell a lot of people on Facebook, they tell their story based on their past. They tell their story on things that's happened to them. And they repeat that story over and over and over. And like I said, your subconscious makes it real right now. But your story, your past story is not who you are. What is done to you is not who you are. And yes, some people have horrible things happen to them, but that's not who you are. That's just something that happened to you. Even if a doctor diagnoses you with something, that's not you, right? It's something that's illegally inside of you. But now breath is rewriting the story.
Amen.
And I love that. I've done things in my life that wasn't good. I've treated my wife bad. I resisted my pastor that I grew up with sometimes and said things I shouldn't have said. But that's not my story. And as far as I know, I have repented to everybody that I've ever done things wrong to. And believe that if I've done something wrong to somebody I don't know about, that they have received peace over that. Because we can't carry those stories into our life. And we can't carry those stories that we know about somebody when literally we are called to go help them to a great awareness. That everybody has a calling on their life. Don't you believe that? Some kind of calling, whether it's in a hospital or a platform or whatever it is. So breath is now rewriting the story, and Jerusalem is in this context refers to the inner center where peace, where previously awakening has occurred. And Saul's harm symbolizes old religious identity, that old belief systems. Ananias is part of this that asks, can this one really change? That's basically what it is. Can they really change? Can this old identity really be transformed? And so this is common inner conflict that a lot of people have. And Ananias continues here. He says he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call upon your name. The chief priest represents the higher levels of external religious authority or this inherited belief system. The authority to bind, symbolizes the power that the old doctrines has over inner awakening. In other words, you can't let this go. This is my aunt. It was good enough for my mom. It's good enough for me. So that's binding that old belief system to you. And we don't want to do that. So those that call upon the name represent the faculties within the sacred self that align with the I exist. We align with the nature and the character and the authority and the very essence of Elohim. We had the same mind, the divine mind that Jesus had. We are one with Elohim. So this reflects an important principle again, compassionate perception. Excuse me just a second. I got a page stuck. Compassionate perception often doubts whether transformation is possible from an old authority. And its structures appear very strong, but breath is about to correct Ananias. Let me go on for a little bit? Yeah. Some more? Okay. So we have a chosen vessel here. The teacher says, go your way, meaning move beyond your hesitation. And it's okay to question things. I think questioning is wise. But we've got to be willing to get the answer. The true answer. We've got to trust the process of awakening. For he is a chosen vessel. This does not mean chosen above others, talking about Saul, but chosen for specific purpose for sacred self. A vessel is simply a container for expression. We all are a vessel. Okay, that would be a good song to write about vessels. We are vessels of the Logos. Saul will become the vessel through which the Logos life pours the message of oneness within Elohim. In other words, Saul's awakening will ripple into every facet of consciousness, personal, collective, ruling beliefs, spiritual faculties. What Paul is going to do and what Paul is going to teach change the world. Did you realize the book of Romans is considered the crown of all the Bible? And I've got it translated, and I've written one book on chapter 8 in Romans. I've got one book on chapter 8, and it's the crown chapter in the entire Bible when it's translated and taught properly. So Paul was a powerful teacher, and so his awakening brought tremendous truth to the world. And this is the universal nature of a transformed awareness. I will show him, that's what it says, I will show him the many things that he will release as he carries my nature, character, authority, and essence and consciousness. So traditional thinking, they read this as suffering. But that's not the root meaning. It includes to let go. It includes to allow. It includes to experience. It includes to release. It means that Saul will release many layers of old identity, old doctrine, old ego, old fear, and inherited consequences thinking, and he will embrace the consciousness of I exist. And Tammy, that's what we all got to do. There's stuff that's been done to us, stuff that's been said about us, stuff that we believed, and that releasing is a sacred thing. It's a holy thing. My daughter practices Reiki and other things, and she massages people. And when I go and get a massage from her, it feels holy. She's releasing bad energy out of my body. You know, I don't know if I'm explaining everything, but she'd say it differently. But she says things and she does things, and there's a releasing, and it is holy. So this releasing is a holy thing. It's not binding and rebuking like we used to do. You know, we used to rebuke the devil and scream and holler, and to me that wasn't very holy. But this is quiet. It's a really relaxing time.
The tension just leaves.
And the tension leaves.
Stress.
And so later in Paul's epistles, you discover Paul saying the carnal ego died. When he said, when I died, and when you look at the word I there, it says ego, me, myself, and I. Me, myself, and I died. I'm no longer separate. I'm one. And I've always been one. And he let go of the thoughts. This awakening is a transformation in which Saul dissolves and Paul emerges. Breath is telling Ananias, he will not suffer because of me. He will release what no longer belongs to him so that the true nature, the true character, the true authority and essence and consciousness can begin to shine through. So you know what's holding us back more than anything else? Is our belief that there's something in us that can hold us back. It's our hanging on to the past. That's what holds everybody back. It's not something you've done bad. It's just the belief systems. And so what I do, and have done often, I'll say, Father, I think I've let go of everything that's holding me, but you know. And if there's anything in my thought patterns, I'm not asking if there's anything I need to do. I don't need to do anything. But is there anything that I need to let go that's still holding me back? You know, because I know there's these diseases in my body. They don't belong to me. And so I believe they don't belong to me, but I still think there's something that I need to let go. It's not that I'm doing something bad, but I think sometimes in our subconsciousness, we still believe this fact that, well, we're getting old. We have to die from something. You know, doctors have said all kinds of things like age. Age is one thing we need to let go. We think so much on age, it's unbelievable. We think about time all the time. All the time we think about time. But when they walked with Father in the cool of the day, there was no time at all. There was no sickness. There was no disease. There was no lack. But when they left that cool of the day experience, then time began to affect man. Time was just for measurement, not to affect us. So there are some things that we need to compassionately, if you would, let go. Because the person that needs compassion the most from you is you. You need to be compassionate about yourself. So Paul's future writings will carry this fragrance because they will come from a man that discovered oneness by letting his old identity fall away. Isn't that powerful? Sadly, the translators of the sacred scripture, They translated it into Latin, then to German, and to English. They entirely mistranslated what Paul wrote. They added to it. I wrote a song, How You've Never Been, I can't even think of the name now of it. You've never been given up on. Because in one of Paul's writings, he's writing about what happened at the foundation of the world. And he was talking about how men begin to lust after men, women after women. And then it said, therefore God gave them up. That's what you've never been given up. It literally says in there, Tammy, God, therefore God gave them up. And I thought, that's impossible. So I looked it up in the Greek, and they reversed everything. And it said, therefore they gave God up. And don't we do that? I say this all the time. We give God up for medicine. We give God up for banks. We give our true supply up for all kinds of stuff. We give God up because we don't even know who God is. Right? And so Paul was powerful, and we are more clearly seeing the truth of what he taught and wrote, not just in the materials, but also in what we're beginning to see and we're beginning to hear with our single eye. So I'm going to close at this part here because we're going to get into a whole new section here. But I hope you enjoyed that. And any comment?
17.
We'll start at 17 next week. But I am so enjoying going through Acts, and we have so much to do, so much more to go through there. So I hope you've enjoyed this. We love you guys. Hope you have a wonderful Mother's Day celebration. And I always say this, I would appreciate if you would share this on your Facebook page, share our songs to your world, because we can't reach your world. But we're so excited. Kay and I are very excited about doing these songs. We, like Kay said, she wasn't going to write it anymore for a while, but all of a sudden she's just getting upload after upload upload of titles. So there's probably, I'm thinking we have about 120 songs right now.
Wow.
And that's in about a month.
Wow.
It is. You know me, I go crazy. I do 3 a day sometimes. I don't go crazy, excuse me, don't use that word. But I love doing them, and I know they're helping people. And there are people that will not read our post, that would not listen to our sermon, but they're listening to songs. And there are people that will read our post, that will read it one time. But now they're out there and they're listening to our songs 10 times, 12 times a day. And it's changing their life. They're calling me in tears. They're talking about how they're dancing all over the house. And this is so powerful. This is a great revelation because, like I said, David, everything he wrote, it was a song. He sang it. And singing is important to us. So we love you. If you have any songs, titles that you would like written, if you want to, message us. And if we hear the words and they come to us, then we will do that. And also I have one on there for, I saw a message that Paul Young put on about if you could sit down in the living room of the shack, what would you ask Mother? And a whole bunch of people were asking things, and several of them wrote about the loss of their loved one, and several wrote about the loss of their dogs. So I put both of those on there because I wrote 2 songs about that, on losing a pet and losing when they say they're gone about your family. So we're helping people. Crystal, I'm not sure I've met you before. Harba, I'm not going to pronounce your last name. Song stick, that's what she said. You're right, Crystal. God bless you. We love you all. Bye-bye. In Oklahoma, we say we love y'all.